I'd like to welcome you for this evening's lawn and garden talks, and a special thank you to the master gardeners that helped me put this together and encouraging this talk for this evening. There's one that try to find somebody that did it, and I think Jan has kind of twisted my arm and says, "Oh, you can do that." So we're going to give it a shot here and see what we can do. Looking at eco-friendly gardening, and looking mainly to the vegetable garden. And I know the same thing would apply to any type of gardening. If you're flower gardening, if you're gardening in a big garden, or if it's a gardening in containers or your back patio, whatever it might be. So it all still applies to the same thing. So again, to try to take and apply to that, that's what we've got. Questions before we begin? Anything? All right. I guess I think all of you in here probably, I just got to give a feel here that all of you have a garden. Okay. And I guess the size, as I said, really doesn't matter. So kind of keep that in mind as we're going and looking through here. All right. Do you have the handout there? It's the copy of the program that you need to take notes on if there's notes or anything. Some of it, because it's this is in color and then printed in black and white, didn't come through real good, such as that very first one. My email there, contact info if you needed to get a hold of me. Or go to the website that's on the pencil, and you'll find it on there. So, all right. So, in looking at that, I guess the first thing is looking at what is eco-friendly. And start looking at that. And that's kind of my first question. What do you think eco-friendly is? Any words that you can help me describe it? Help me.
Pesticide-free.
Pesticide-free? Give me some more. Or is that the only thing?
Companion planting.
Companion planting?
Planting for beneficials.
Beneficials?
Planting for yourself instead of planting for the grocery store.
Oh, okay. Trying to self-sustain? That's kind of one of the first ones that I think of, is it's sustainable. In other words, will it last for a long time, or we're just going to use it up? Yeah. That's it. Okay. So we look at eco-friendly, maybe being sustainable. How about working with nature? We're going to work with the environment and nature, and work with it rather than against it. How can we work with it? Useful living elements, useful organisms, and looking at the organisms and the useful elements that are there, and encouraging those within that. How about interaction between the living elements of the garden? Where are those at? And those living elements within there. Okay. And encouraging that interaction between them. So that's kind of term little things I look at as eco-friendly. I kind of got what you might see. If you had to put a picture into it, what would you see eco-friendly as? Something like that. How well you see that garden. I see weeds in that garden. There's really, back here, it almost looks like cousin. A lot of grasses growing up in there. I don't know if there's too many things that are edible in there that would be useful.
Looks like a garden in August.
Some of them I've seen that like that. How about this one?
A little bit better.
A little bit better. Getting closer. I see some things in front here. Then maybe back here. Not sure what those are or what might be back here. Okay. Then we can look at the big picture. This is a super duper one. This is probably what everybody's garden looks like, right? Got everything neatly arranged. It's in there. We're working with all creatures within that garden. You know, you've got everything within that, working with the whole system. So, you know, there could be a lot of different pictures when it comes to eco gardening and looking at eco-friendly. And, you know, maybe that try to put a picture in your mind of what it is, and that we can continue to make that. I look at eco-friendly gardening kind of in 7 steps maybe we wanted to look at that we have, or things to consider and look at as we go through that gardening, and we'll kind of look at those as we go through here. But, you know, first of all, you have to look at your site and where your site is at. Okay? And then from there, get a plan or a design for that garden. Once you know where your site is, then know, okay, what's your plan? What's your design? How are you going to plant things within that? You need to know for sure your soil. And I've capitalized that because, and we'll find out, that that's the key element, is that soil that we're going to be growing. Unless you're doing it hydroponically, and you have a hydroponic garden with using just water and soilless, you know, but that's the key element. Okay. And then a little bit on selecting the plants that we have, wisely planting those plants, and then the care and maintenance that goes throughout the season so that at the end you can harvest and use what you have and enjoy it. All right, so let's look at this through here. First of all, where is your garden? Or where would you put it? Now, most garden plants need at least 6 to 8 hours of sun. You can get 10 to 12, that's better. But most plants are, you know, within the garden are sun-loving. They like the sun. So if you look at your garden that you already have, can you get that? Okay. If you can't, then maybe you need to look at a little bit more at, can I move it? Or the types of plants that you're growing. So that's one of the first things. Also, where's your water source? In our climate today, you almost have to add water. And you have to do some water. Okay? So are you using a hose? Is it close by? You're going to have to carry water. You know, where's your source? What do you got to have? Okay? If your garden is on a slope, you try to get level to no more than 3%. Okay? Most of the ground around here in Mercer County, if you're familiar, is in that 2 to 3% slope range. Okay? But as you start getting above that, then you're going to have to start looking at terracing or somehow building that garden so it stays flat. Because otherwise you're going to start looking at erosion and that type of thing happening. Another thing a lot of people look at, and there's pros and cons to look at that, but what's the exposure to it? North, south, is it east, west, you know, as the sun comes through, and exposure to that. Okay. And the reason we look at that is, okay, you want to know that so that, again, where those plants, those taller plants, you don't want them shading your smaller plants as the sun moves through the day. And so kind of look at, okay, where's the exposure? And how is that sun shining on plants that you have in the garden so that you still get that at least 6 to 8 hours of sun. Okay, just a little eco-friendly, I guess I'll kind of look at things to keep in mind and working with nature rather than trying to work against it. Or nature not working for you. Garden design, and lots of different things. Here shows one backyard garden. There's a couple beds back in the back, or here's another shot. And then looking at some trellises within that, the design that you want to have, kind of putting them into sections. Using the railroad ties, those raised beds are a very common thing that you might use. Again, raised beds, one, you're going to put the soil in there, and so again, we go back to that key element that we'll talk about here, and be able to help with the gardening that you have. The other thing is that raised bed drains better, and so therefore warms faster in the spring. So you can usually plant sooner because of that. And so you get extended, it's one way of extending your growing season.
Question.
Yeah.
Notice those beds have got railroad ties in them.
Yeah.
Potential issue with creosote, or are those older ties that they?
Could be a potential. The older ties might have that, or the tar that might be on there.
Okay.
At the same time, the concentration is going to be so low that it's not going to be an issue.
Okay.
I guess I can relate that back to when I was teaching in high school, FFA built a bunch of picnic tables for the park.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted them built with the pressure-treated lumber so that they would stay out there. And then I was like, well, wait a minute, I don't know where we can do that. So we checked to see once. Well, that treatment is within the wood, and the only way it would affect the person is if they spilled the food on it and then licked it up. Okay. And they would have had to lick an awful lot of mouth before it would even have made any kind of an effect. And so, the concentration is probably the biggest thing if it's not as good. Here's a little fancier one using just some blocks. Again, raised bed and being able to put that up there, and being able to work with that. Here's one that's just in a box. I guess I'll kind of lay claim to this one. That's my garden. Not much, but I've got it covered so I can extend my season and everything. But again, it's up there where I can reach it real easy and work with it and not have to bend down. That's another advantage of the raised bed and bringing it up. Being able to work. Not very big though, you're kind of limited on the size. Or it's just a flat garden like this one. Again, you can get how it's put together, what design is going to work, and the layout within your plants within that. What we add here, you can extend that design by having the trellises, be able to put your vine crops, be able to come up with that. So we'll use fence, again, to be able to bring those up and allow those climbing plants to be able to climb up that rather than just spread across the ground and limit your space. Again, part of that design and thinking through what am I going to plant, okay, and then what design can I use to be able to put those. And then this would be one where, okay, do I want that in my, garden is on the south side, do I want that in the front of the garden so that, when they get that sun, is it shading everything that's behind it? Again, that exposure and where it's at. Consider and take in mind, working with that. Here's one, just a tub container. Growing it in that container, and lots of different plants within that. These different plants, companion planting within that, plants that go together. And that could be a whole another topic, looking at what plants work with which ones, and companion planting. But there's where you can do that, and go right on your back patio or backyard. If you're going to start a garden, and most of you all have one, so kind of just quickly go through this, but biggest thing is you want to kill the sod and control the weeds first. Okay? A good eco-friendly way to do that is put some black plastic or cardboard down for a few weeks, and then let that kill them, and then remove that, and then be able to, without using any kind of weed killer or spray, to do that. From there, you would want to make sure that you get that area dug up. You either by hand or shovel or spade, or mechanical tillage. We'll talk a little bit about tillage and some of the trade-offs, advantages, disadvantages in there. If you're going to go through with tilling, back to that soil. But again, if you're starting it, you want to make sure, that you've got the other vegetation that you don't want under control first. So removing or getting rid of that. Garden tillage. Are we looking at that good or bad? And I know I've got a brother-in-law who just loves to till. Okay. So we can look at it. There's different methods you can do. The shovel by hand, we use the mechanical tiller, goes way back, where we used to use the horse and plow, or tractor and plow, or the old bore plow, plowing it over, right? Now, good things about tillage, you get that new soil within there. Okay? So we kind of have to look at good or bad. Now, tillage, when the soil is too wet, can increase soil composition. Good or bad? Hopefully you can figure that out. Yeah, that's going to be bad. So tillage, if it's wet, springtime when you want to get out there and plant, odds are you might have a little bit of wet soil. And so you're looking at some compaction issues as a result. Tillage can lead to the formation of a hard pan. Everybody know what a hard pan is? And you take that rototiller, think of it, okay? That's turning, okay? And it goes down through the soil and picks up what's there, maybe 4 inches, 3 inches, depending on how far you went. But when it hits that soil that's underneath that shovel, it's pushing down on it. And so it'd be the same way as if you took your foot and stomped on it. You keep hitting that. Okay, everything on top is fine, but down underneath, you've just created what they call a hard layer in there, or better known as a hard pan. Okay? And so now you've got that layer where, okay, things start growing just fine, and then all of a sudden the roots get to that, and where do they go? They can't. They start going sideways. Okay? Or water comes down through, and it gets to that, has no place to go, and so now all of a sudden we've got ponding and water sitting on the soil because it doesn't drain out. And so again, tillage, especially if it's wet, and you start packing that in. Tillage does lead to oxidation of organic matter. Okay? Oxidation, adding oxygen to organic matter. So that means it's going to make that organic matter break down. That part's good. You want organic matter to break apart to release the nutrients that are within that stuff so the plant can use it. Okay? But at the same time, if you're continually doing that, eventually the organic matter is going to be gone. And then we don't have any. So now we're going to look at, okay, well, how does that organic matter, we'll go through when we look at soil, how does that organic matter help? Okay? So, good or bad, you got both there. Tillage can bring weed seeds to the surface. Right? You may have buried those weed seeds one time, and then now you take and till it up, and we bring them up to the surface, and now they germinate. And I wonder, where did those all come from? I thought I had them under control. Birds and wind will blow in from others around if they don't take care of them. Tillage can help decrease some insect and disease problems because it breaks up that life cycle, good or bad. Now we start looking at a good thing, right? There are some of the disease cycles, if we can till it up, that's going to break those disease cycles. So they'll break up the homes where those insects might be, and therefore get rid of them. Tillage can help soils warm up faster in the spring. And break that soil loose, it allows the water to evaporate, and therefore it warms faster. That's the key thing in soils in the spring. If it's wet, that it takes a lot of sunlight to be able to warm that water. And so the best way to do that is get the water out, evaporate. And so therefore, killing it, we can help get that water to evaporate. And be able to get that to warm up a little bit faster. It can provide a better seed bed, especially if you've got really small seed crops that you're planting. Okay? Those little seeds, you want to make sure that you get good seed to soil contact. And so a good mix of soil, mixing that soil so that you've got finer soil, gives good contact to that seed, so it helps it to germinate better. So again, the tillage, that's a good thing. Can be usefully to incorporate any lime or fertilizer material, get it within the root zone where the roots need it. Okay? And that's a key thing to remember. We'll maybe mention that, I'll repeat that again when we get to nutrients. Okay? And plants, when it comes to water and nutrients. Okay? The food that plant needs, okay? It has to dissolve in the water, and then it goes in through the roots. That's the only way it's going to get in that plant, except for the carbon, the hydrogen, and the oxygen that's in the air. Breathe that through the little openings at the bottom of the leaves. But any water or any nutrients has to dissolve in that and then move in through the roots. Okay? A little biology about plants. So you want to have those things down there where the roots are at. Putting the nutrients up with the on the plant, not going to do you any good. You want to get them where the roots are at. So tillage can help get those down to that. If you look at a green manure or plants, cover crops, that type of thing, it's helpful to turn those in and get those mixed within the soil so the microorganisms can break those down and be able to make that useful down in the root zone. So again, good and bad of tillage, there's some good, there's some bad. How we manage that, how do we work with that, be friendly with everything else in there. That's a key thing. Let's look at some others that might help. One of the things with planting of the garden that you always have to be concerned about in this area is looking at the wildlife and being friendly with them. Rabbits and woodchucks, put a fence in and get that, make sure that fence is down in the ground. That's one way to keep them out. For if you got a deer issue, and deer, again, plastic netting, and having a deer fence, having it high enough is a way to be able to keep them away. If you're growing sweet corn, you almost have to make sure that you've got an electric fence around, at least most people to be successful, or somehow to be able to keep the raccoons out. An electric fence is probably one of your best ways to do that. There are some other methods and means, but it's one of those things to be able to, you're going to have to deal with this. And so we've got to be able to plan and look at those, maybe some other fencing, and somehow keep the critters away. Or if some people say I want to be eco-friendly and I'm just going to let the critters also, if they get some, I'll share. Well, they don't share very well either, I can tell you. They don't keep you in mind. And so you may need to make sure you're doing some planning when it comes to the wildlife and planning with that garden. Other important questions that we need to make sure in the planning process is how much space does that mature vegetable plant need? That's one of the key things when you start looking at, okay, I've got this space, all right, now I'm going to plant these tomato plants. All right, you need to make sure that, okay, look at the type of plant that you have and how you're growing it. We're going to put it in a cage or we're going to just let it go. And make sure that it's got enough space. And being able to plan ahead for that so that that mature plant has enough room. We'll also look at disease management, how that helps. You can make sure you've got the right space. So you need to keep that in mind if you're planting seeds. You look at the packet, it tells you, here's how far they should be planted apart. And so make sure that you follow that. That's a good guideline. Okay, and doing that. If you don't, then you need to make sure that you're taking into account what's going to happen as a result of that. Okay. One of the things, how much do you expect to harvest? How much do you expect to get? Okay. And then how can I use and handle in a timely manner the material, what you get? My spinach right now is growing like crazy, and I think it's about every other night we have spinach salad, as we're trying to keep up with it. Same way with the kale that I have, it just grows like crazy right now. But it's been ideal weather for that too. A little cooler, and it likes that. Again, how much can you handle in a timely manner and be able to use? Because you can't keep that for a couple weeks and then expect it to be good. Another thing to keep in mind, when do they need to be planted? Okay. Are they a cool season? Are they a warm season? Are you doing a fall garden? Okay. How long a time do they need to reach maturity? All those kind of things, keeping those in mind.
You're going to grow turnips for the first time,
Uh-huh.
so when do we plant the turnip seeds? Because Dale looked into it, and it's more like later in the summer.
Yeah. Those turnips, they like cooler, so you get planted later in the summer, and then come to late fall, they'll be ready. Because they like them, they'll ripen better on school. And there's different types of turnips. I'm going to put that in there too. There's lots of different types. Depending on the type of it.
Sweet to Helena.
Okay. But again, that's good. You look into it, check to see once, when, and where those are.
What would-
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with the concept of a fall garden, so what would be some vegetables that would be considered?
Fall gardens would fall into a lot like the cool season. Okay? And so, I think in the fall, I'll plant another round of kale. Now, I showed you my little garden box that I have, but I'll plant that kale seed, and it'll start growing, and then I can close that up in the winter, and that'll most of the time sit. In January and February, when it gets down there to zeros, it pretty much stops. But then when it gets a little warmer again, toward February, late February, March, it starts growing again. And so that fits into more of that fall garden type thing, the crops that you would have. Or plants that like cooler weather, or that will make it through and come back in the spring. Another one to look for and consider with plants that you're planting is make sure you understand what are the pests for that plant. So then you know, okay, what problems might I be expecting, what things can I look for in those plants, so know what to expect, as what to watch out for. And then a key thing is how much time do you have? I've talked to a lot of people that think, oh, I can plant those seeds, those tomatoes, and then I'm done until August when I can start picking them. And you'll find that the gardening and those tomatoes, there's a little more work to it than that. If you want to be successful, if you want to get something out there. So kind of keep your time and things in mind. Before you plant, here are some things that you need to know. You know the pH of your soil. You know what the fertility is. Your water needs, we talked about that and access for it. The wildlife, we talked about within that, the pressures that might be there. Okay? A couple of those we've mentioned and just making sure that you're there. All right? Let's look at that soil. Okay? Soil for gardening needs to be fertile and well drained. Okay? Fertile meaning it's got to have the nutrients and some food there for it. Okay? And then also, I don't know too many plants that will grow in the mud or grow well, vegetable plants, in a soil where it's always soggy and wet. It's going to lead to a lot of problems. So how do you know whether you have a good, fertile soil? And the soil is the single most important ingredient within there. Okay? If you're serious about gardening, you need to be serious and understand the properties and characteristics of your soil. Okay? When it comes to soil health, there's a lot of things that can affect that. And you can, the productivity that you get from it, you can degrade it very quickly, or you can improve it. Let's take a look at those. What's your soil made up of? First of all, we start with mineral matter. That's really came from the underlying bedrock that we have. And over time, that weather got that soil, so that's the mineral matter. A lot of times you refer to mineral matter as that's the sand, silt, and clay. That's the little rock particles. Then we got the organic matter within that. And that's the dead, either plant or animal matter. Okay? That's within there. It was once living things, but is now dead. Okay? And then there's microbes. We've got lots of different microbes within there. There's bacteria, there's fungi, there's algae, there's earthworms or the macroinvertebrates. There's springtails, mites, centipedes, beetles, and you can go on and on. All kind of little critters down within that soil. In that handful of soil, the amount of little things that are in there, you put that under there. Very key elements of the soil. That's what we want. And then one of the other things within that is what we call pore space. That's the openings. The spaces between the particles. What's that soil do? Just a reminder, it holds and cycles those nutrients. That's what's going to hold them, and that's what's going to cycle those nutrients within there. It allows the water to come in, it can store some, and then also allow the water to go out and drain. It has to be able to do both of those. It's going to support that food and fiber that you're trying to produce. Big one in here. Hear about, read about, and at least I do with farmers right now, is that sequestration of carbon, and the carbon sequestration, and you will hold that carbon dioxide within the soil, and it's all part of that soil is one of the key things in our climate change and the things that are happening in a way that we might be able to mitigate that. The soil is also there for pest and weed suppression, be able to hold and suppress those pests and weeds within that. So it gets the properties of soil. It starts with the physical properties. Those are the ones that you can see. Okay? And so where you can feel them, you can touch them, okay? Be able to see there. And that's the mineral solids, the water, the air, organic matter. Those all mixed together, what we call a texture, and how it feels. There's the tilth and how it breaks apart. And then also there's drainage, and that mainly we look at by color. There's the biological part. Okay? That's all those microbes and macroinvertebrates that are in there. And then there's the chemical end. Okay? And we measure that, and we look at that. That's the charge within that particle. What we look at is pH, CEC, or cation exchange capacity, the nutrient level or concentration. We'll get a brief look at some of those in the chemistry that goes with that. But if we look at that soil here, you got some comparisons and horizons, you're looking at the depth of soil. And the key part is that topsoil or that A horizon, the top part, and then you've got everything down the subsoil and the bedrock down underneath. And when you're comparing these and looking at these, you know, that's what you could do if you wanted in your garden. Dig a hole down in, look at that horizons and see once, okay, what do you have there to work with? Okay, and be able to measure those. So physically, you can tell. Topsoil normally is going to have what? It's going to be a darker color. Why is it darker? It's richer because it has what in it?
Organic.
The organic matter. That's where your leaves and your everything is at. Okay. Unless you've taken and really mixed them way down in. Okay. But that's where you're going to have the dark part. That's the part that you're concerned about because that's where your roots are going to be at for those plants that you're growing. And so we got here color, tells you something about it with the organic matter. That's going to tell you about how productive it is, how good drainage it has. If I look at these two samples of soil that I have here, now it's very easy that you can see okay, the difference here in this, what we call loamy soil, nice dark color to it. This is actually still a loamy soil. This is some that Lee Camp Farm Market has, in which they've mixed some of the topsoil with some of the dredge material out of the lake. Still, though, it doesn't have near the dark color, does it? And why is that? Doesn't have much organic matter in it, does it? That's probably the thing that's in there. But again, telling the differences between those, you can do the same thing with a shovel, dig yours up and just kind of look at the color and see what's there. In the garden, the way fresh you can.
So what could you do to amend, because you can't soil?
We'll talk about that.
Okay.
Like that question. Okay? You have some? It is good. I said a lot of people, you know, they, last week was lunch. Worked great being able to use because of it, you know, not having to hide as much clay.
Why did something like that?
Okay, we'll find out. So again, we look at that comparison and what's in an ideal soil composition. We had that mineral matter. That should be the sand, silt, clay, about 45%, the solid part. And we also have the organic matter. You have 5% organic matter, that's pretty good. Okay. And then you've got that pore space. Now, pore space, that's the openings between all of these particles. Okay. If it's real dry like it was over the weekend and earlier, it's going to have a lot of air in it. I don't know how much where you're at, but I know I live in Coldwater, and I had 0.6 of an inch of rain in my rain gauge this morning.
Oh, wow.
So I was surprised. I don't know. My neighbor always says my gauge is not calibrated right. But I was happy with that. But so that water that is in there pushed the air out and took up those air spaces. And so those will fluctuate depending on the amount of rain and where we're at there. But that's the spaces in between. Okay. Just kind of put it in a picture form here. Organic matter, that's the wild card. And so when we look at organic matter, the organic matter that's in there, that's that dead plant animal material, okay, that's going to help to hold the water, it's going to help and add a place for the nutrients to be able to be held in there. Okay? And that's that organic matter, and that's the more we can have that, it's critical to the organisms that are in here. Because all those little organisms, those earthworms, and those other little critters that are in there, that's their food. That's what they want. They're the ones that are going to help break that dead plant material that you put under those leaves, break them apart. And they're going to eat them and break them apart. so that the nutrients that are within those cells are released for them then, for that plant to be able to use. And so again, it's all part of that breakdown of the chemicals and materials that are in there. The organic matter is what releases those nutrients and what's available to the plant. Okay? Each percent of organic matter in the soil releases 20 to 30 pounds of nitrogen. So if we look at that, I have an ideal soil with 5% organic matter, and I easily got, 100 to 150 pounds of nitrogen. That's a lot of nitrogen. Well, look at what those nutrients are for. Same way when we looked at the P2O5, which is the phosphorus that a plant needs, and then also some sulfur. It also helps buffer the soil, that organic matter does, when it comes to pH. And we'll kind of look at that. That soil organic matter, that's like a sponge within there. And holds within that, and kind of holds it, but at the same time will release it when it needs to. So how do you build that organic matter? How do you make this here look more like this here? Okay? One of your key things, if you can add compost. Again, this is a backyard compost bin, okay, that came out of there, and that's all that's in here, dead organic matter, okay, within that. But you start adding material like this, and then that's going to help add to that. And that's nice and dark. You can add some livestock manures. You got to be careful with that.
Yeah, there are questions about that livestock manure. So there are different kinds, and heard that chicken manure is too high in nitrogen burn. Composted cow manure raised my alkalinity, so I had to put on sulfur. Make some general comments about livestock.
Yeah, livestock manures, there's all types, because there's all types of animals. Each one, no animal's poop is the same, put it that way. You mentioned the chicken or poultry litter. That is probably, if you were to rank them, ranks one of the better ones. Okay. The key when it comes to any of those manures is understanding what nutrients are in there, so that you put the right amount on. So if you take and you just load it up with poultry manure, you're very likely going to be, like you said, it's going to burn. Because we put way too much nitrogen within it. That's what poultry litter is high. And so you want to make sure that you know what's in that before you put it in there. And then we can look at some, if it's not composted real well, such as horse manure that might have a lot of straw in it. Right? You take that straw and put that on a garden where you have a lot of clay. And so now you get that wet and you put clay with straw. Then you would, very good. That's exactly what you would end up with, correct? So make sure it's composted first or chopped in small pieces before you put it in. Know what you're working with when you do that.
Yeah, we were putting cow manure on our garden for several years, and we had it tested this spring, and it came back a big red thing. No more manure. We had 300 parts per million of phosphorus.
Yep. Again, that comes back to the nutrient, know what nutrients you have in there, and it's what you're working with, how much is in each of those. Okay? And your backyard compost is going to be very low amounts and a lot of those nutrients as compared to your animal manures. So again, having it been tested and knowing the nutrient levels. So it comes back using the right source at the right rate. Cover crops and green manures. Green manures is the green plants from cover crops. We'll show some pictures about cover crops and how that might fit in. The less you can till, the better you're going to increase the organic matter because you're not breaking it, oxidizing.
Can you give me a percentage on, amount of amendments, like add 50% compost and 20% livestock, and, is there such an algorithm?
Not that I know of, but there is, based on, based on a soil test and knowing what the nutrient levels are, and then if you're going to put livestock manures on, having it tested to know what those nutrient levels are. All right, now we can take that comparison and see what we're short of, okay, based on the plants that I'm growing, and be able to say, okay, now with the corn, sweet corn as an example, a lot of times you want maybe close to 200 pounds of nitrogen throughout the growing season. That's a roundabout figure there, okay? And so based on your soil test, okay, how much manure do I need to put on to be able to meet that nitrogen level? At the same time though, now we've also got to look at that manure. It has phosphorus in it. And so I need to make sure that I don't exceed my phosphorus level and what I need, and potassium.
But I also need that organic matter just to make the soil friable, right?
Right. So then you may need to look at other sources of organic matter besides the livestock manure. And so maybe looking for some compost, or creating your own compost, or looking at maybe doing some cover crops, and being able to use those to be able to get that.
I'll have one more question, and then I'll shut up for a while.
No, that's fine.
Yeah,
That's good. I like it.
I tried something else this spring, so I don't know how it's gonna work yet, but Tractor Supply now sells, brand called Thrive worm casings, either in powder form, or they also have it in a suspended solution so that you can spray it all over the lot. Did I do something good? Is that something that you would recommend, to add microbes to the soil?
The worm casings is worm castings, it's worm manure, okay? And so it's the dead material from the worms. And so it's just another source of manure,
Okay.
just as coming from worms instead of cattle or chicken.
It doesn't have the high phosphorus in it, does it?
No, worm, I don't think it has much. I would not know, do not know off the top of my head what the levels of nutrients in those are. So, yeah, it's a good thing, and being that again supports, probably not the other worms in there, but a lot of the other microinvertebrates that are within that soil to help for them. So it was, that's a good thing. It's just a different source. Now, it's just putting it at the right rate. All right. Composting is a bit,
So I had some black bags of leaves that I composted last fall. And when I was putting soil in, I kind of layered the leaves in between that soil and the raised bed. Is that good? Some of the leaves were not they were oak leaves, some of them, and they were not composted, they were kind of big, but
still is good.
that's good.
Yeah, that's, again, it's another source of fertilizer. It's just that, and we'll talk about composting here. And what's good about composting, to make that more good. But that was a good way to do that. Composting is simply taking your organic matter, organic waste, and getting them to decompose and be able to use for the plants. In other words, it's you're having the right mix of the brown, which is your leaves, your woody materials, that type of thing, and mixing those with your greens, which would be maybe some grass, your food scraps, that type of thing, or maybe some of the different manures, and with water and then some air, along with the microorganisms and the macroorganisms, they're going to break that down where you get compost. Now, that process naturally happens. Your leaves, you put them in a pile, or what happens falls in the woods. They're naturally going to fall there, and they're going to take microorganisms will help break those down. The rain, the sun shining on it, back and forth, that's going to break down into organic matter. In a compost bin, and if you take a look at that, you keep that mixture right, we can speed that process up. And that's the whole idea of composting.
What is that mixture rate?
Depends on the process and what you're doing. In a compost bin, which I have a small little one in the backyard. It's just, I don't know, 2 feet by 4 feet maybe, not very big. But it's what we call an active process where I go in there and I mix it up every once in a while. But I'll take my leaves, I'll chop them up with the lawnmower. A lot of my trimmings that I take from, I try to avoid sticks, but trees or from shrubs and that, I'll run them through the lawnmower first and bag it, and then dump it in there. Right? If you're doing it in an active process there and stirring them up, and then I add all my vegetable waste, coffee grounds, and banana peels, all those things. Normally they say a 10-to-1 ratio. You might be able to cut that down if you're doing more active. If you're less, then you're probably going to be more 1/20 of the brown to the green. Think of that if you have, if by chance you bagged or mowed your lawn and all those grass clippings and then just dumped them on a pile, but didn't do anything with them. And a little bit later, a couple weeks later, you came back and you stirred that up and it stinks. That's because you got too much green material. You needed to add some more brown to it. And if you get that mix right, you'll have a nice earthy smell rather than that sweet smell. So it's kind of a real science to looking at
I do the mixing and everything, but it just seems like in the fall, heavy on brown.
That's when you have more brown, yeah.
And it takes a while. Right now, it's what I put in the last fall right now is starting to come around.
Yeah. And again, say that comes down to you need good temperatures, the right temperature for those little microorganisms to work and to be able to keep moving and working within there. And so once it gets down there where it's 40 or less, they're done for. It's too cold. Now, if you keep that pile right, it'll stay warm enough in the middle that they'll keep working.
What part does water have to play in composting?
What part is water?
Should I be adding water to my compost pile? Because I don't active. Mine's very passive. It's just doing its composting by way of nature, which sometimes takes years.
Takes a long time, yeah. That's where the water, those bugs are working in there, the little microorganisms, they're going to create heat. And so therefore any moisture is going to evaporate.
Okay.
They need moisture to work. But they can't have too much either. And so that comes back again to that right mixing, and then the more you mix it, the more you might have to add some water. Okay, so if it starts getting dry, a lot of times, and again, I did some experiments with the students back when I was teaching horticulture in the class. we had the drums and tried different things where we would, we were constantly measuring the temperature based on that temp, whether we needed to add water or whatever. And that was one thing. It was funny because we got some of the food waste from the cafeteria. The pizza crust and the cake did not eat. It just wouldn't be decomposed. Now, is it good stuff? Am I supposed to digest that? That was wouldn't decompose as compared to the plant material that we had in here.
Does it need to be in sunlight, compost bed?
Not necessarily, because if you put it in a drum and, it's all closed up, the key is the sunlight's going to add heat and be able to keep them going. But no, it does not need the sunlight to be able to make that work. It's just the microorganisms need the heat to make it work. And they'll create some heat. So again, that's composting, very eco-friendly way of doing things, and highly encouraged if you want to do eco, because that's what you can add back to your garden and be able to work with it. A little bit about soil chemistry and moving on here. So, soil particles have a negative charge, and many of the nutrients have a positive charge. Okay? So when we look at that, positives and negatives do what? Back from your science class, they attract. If you're looking for a restroom or anything,
Yes.
it's through the hall, turn left, and then kind of wind to the front of the building.
All right, thank you.
Or anyone else if you need that. But again, positive and negative. So if we can get those soil particles, the organic matter is the same way. It's just like a soil particle, it has a negative charge. And so therefore, organic matter is going to increase, as I always called it, it increases the seats on the bus, so you can put more students in there. And have more nutrients. And it's a place to hold them until the roots are ready for them. Keep those in. So that's where, again, understanding that comes up. We can measure that through what's called CEC, or what we call cation exchange capacity. So if you do a soil test, you can be able to get that. Okay. And looking at, those cations are positively charged particles. And the texture of the organic matter that's in there will determine what that CEC level will be. More organic matter, the better we're going to have more seeds. All right. Another thing within soil chemistry is soil pH. Just a brief refresher back to chemistry class. If you remember that in science, it's measured on a scale of 1 to 14, and that affects how well those nutrients are available to the plants. Okay. Best way to get that is a soil test to know what's there. You can also do get a little meter like this. I know Harry has used this one every once in a while. It's just a little meter that you can take and put into the ground, and then it gives you a measurement of the pH and where that pH is at that spot. And so if you want to, if you have a small garden and be able to check a few areas, this is available.
We don't have a lot of gardening space now for vegetable gardening, so I do it mostly in containers. Do you recommend dumping out the soil every season and putting fresh soil, or just,
If you're
I mean,
using,
we don't really have room to compost and do all these kinds of things.
are you using,
I'm using
Soil.
whiskey barrels.
okay, that's great. Are you using soil like this, or are you
Yeah.
using
Yeah,
soil
I
that
mean, it was
you,
organic soil that I bought in a bag initially to get it started.
Mhm.
And then I try to break up the plants that were in there and leave them to decay over the winter. But then I think, well, it's a container that might, is more susceptible to disease. So I just dump it out and put new soil every season. It's probably a waste, but I just don't want to go to the trouble of growing a few plants only for them to get bugs on it, because the soil is.
And that's one of the risks we run with containers, is that they can have some of those stuff. Most of the time, it's recommended, that you get some new, and that way you eliminated the possibility of any disease or insect eggs or, that might be in there.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you didn't have an issue, odds are you're not going to.
Well, and I spread that on my flower beds. So it's basically composted soil on my flower beds, and then I start fresh with my containers for the vegetables. Because I figure they're more intense growing plants than the perennials, and they need more, I would say, right?
Right.
Right? Okay.
That's a good way to go about it. Okay, so again, that's a way to test that soil if you wanted to do a quick piece of test. I have us here at the office. If you're doing some gardening and would like to test yours, give us a call or let us know. I'll loan it out to you. Just that when you're done, just bring it back so that somebody else needs it. You don't have to hunt it down. But you're welcome to use that. We talk about that pH. This puts more in a picture form. That pH affects how well those nutrients are available. Here's the different nutrients within that, the pH levels. And the wider the bar, the more available or easier it is to get through. I like to look at it, the easier it is for the nutrients to get through the screen of the roots. And as that bar gets narrower, that screen gets smaller, and so they can't get through. And so we want it where these nutrients, where they're all wide. Okay? And so looking at this, with most of these, okay, it's right here between the 6.5 to 7.2, somewhere in that range right here, down the middle. And most of them are at their widest. So that's where we kind of a target, where we want to keep our soil, our pH level. And that's why we would look at that. If we need to, our soil, we find out that that pH is either high or low, then that's where we would need that lime or sulfur to bring that back into. If we're down here where it's very acidic and low, then we put lime on. If it's up here where it's high, then we want to put some sulfur. Okay. So if somebody says, oh, you need lime on your soil, okay, how do you know?
Good.
You want to get a test or check it, see once, where is the pH to know what you're doing. All right, understand. The other thing is, depending on the crop that you're growing, some like things more acidic, where others like it more alkaline. Right? And so we need to know which one are we growing. Then we might know, okay, what do I need to put on to help keep that up there? And then some of them have a very wide range, such as here, tomatoes, sweet corn, pumpkins. We can hit a pretty wide range and that still works. Does that make sense? So if you come back to your plants and knowing what you're growing and where you need to grow this.
You can break up eggshells, right, and coffee grounds. Those are two things I've heard people use as sort of instant compost. But is one more, are the eggshells alkaline and then the coffee grounds are acidic, or, I mean?
Eggshells are lime,
Fine, okay.
calcium. And so yeah, that
So that
would
wouldn't
be.
be too large of a dose, would it,
No,
if you
it
just
wouldn't.
crack, broke up
And
your
then-
eggs and?
And then again, you have to compost them, which I know that there's some in this backyard compost that came out of my compost bin. And all my eggshells go in there. But it takes a while for them to break down. You know, crush them out before you put them in, mix them in, but you still find them. It takes a little while, so it's not an instant thing, but it is a good one.
I'm just trying to figure out mini composting.
Mini composting.
Mini, you know, without doing it with full blown.
Full blown thing, yeah. All right. we talked about the lime, if you've got to bring that pH back to neutral. Wood ash is another common one that can be used. You know, you've got a fireplace where you burn some wood, those ashes, act the same as the lime. If you need to decrease it because it's very acid, bring it back down. It's very alkaline, you need to bring it back down. Okay. Then you use sulfur. You can buy sulfur or, it's not in here, but gypsum, you might have heard of it. That's another one that has sulfur in it, or would help to bring that back down. And so it's another amendment that you could add. Again, it takes at least 6 months, sometimes more than that, for the wood ash, for those eggshells, whatever it is that you're putting on there, for that chemical reaction to work and be able to make. So you want to plan ahead, you got to know ahead. There's not too many instant things out there. That chemical reaction takes a while. It doesn't just happen just like that. Okay.
So, mere acid isn't gonna do it, huh?
That's because of the love. Yeah, it would burn your plants real quick.
No.
But again, depending on the rate that you put it on, you can use it, or just don't put it on too heavy. Depending on how fat, what you got to change. Again, in terms of that right source. Another thing, percent organic matter, usually the higher it is, the better. The higher we can get that, because it supplies the nutrients, microbes are within that. It improves that structure, improves the soil drainage, improves water retention, increases that nutrient holding. And again, you have to do a soil test. You have a fact sheet that through Ohio State where you can go to get that if you need it. Plant nutrients, here's all the nutrients that a plant needs. And it needs all of those. 17 of them. Just like you need your nutrients, plants the same way. Okay? The carbon, the hydrogen, and the oxygen, it's going to get that from the air. That plant breathes just like you. Okay? But then we have macronutrients. That's the one we're mostly concerned about. Macro meaning needs more of them. That's the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium. And then we have these secondary ones where we just talked about sulfur or calcium. And then magnesium. And then there's all these micronutrients. Micronutrients, they need such a small amount, that usually you don't have to worry about. If you're using compost, you don't have to worry about it. There's plenty in there. Okay? It's these up here that we're concerned about. Okay? The nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, nitrogen, that's what makes the chlorophyll. Chlorophyll does what to a plant? Makes it green. Okay? That makes that green within there. Gives it that green plant color. It builds the proteins within that. The add nucleic acids for that plant to be able to grow. So it's going to make it grow. You want your grass nice and green, growing fast. Make sure you got the right level of nitrogen. Okay? But you don't want to get too much. Okay? At the same time. If you don't have enough, then that plant starts getting a yellow look because the chlorophyll isn't in there. All right, phosphorus. There's a key thing to remember. Phosphorus is there for shoots and roots, mainly for their root development. Okay, that's where it starts out for the health of that root. So once that plant is developed and those roots are there, does it need any more phosphorus? Very little. Okay? And that's why you'll find, like with your lawn fertilizers, there's no phosphorus in them because that's lawns established. You don't need that many new roots, and so therefore, don't put it on there. Okay? Why spend the money to put it on there if you don't need it? And then also that keeps it from, if there's too much there, the water's going to take it, it's going to go with the rain, and then end up in our streams and creeks and lake, everything else. And then the potassium that's there for the fruit, the flowering, and the fruit that it produces. So again, it needs that. It also is very good. It's like vitamins to you, helps in fighting the disease and resistance, helps with winter hardiness if you're a winter plant. We talked about calcium and sulfur. Here's a little thing. Okay? You think about that. I'm going to produce a 1 pound tomato. Okay? A 1 pound tomato. I only need 0.04 ounces of nitrogen. 0.04 ounces of nitrogen. That's a couple drops. And the same way with the phosphorus and the potassium. So do I need to put a whole lot on my vegetable garden? No. I really don't need that much. So I come back to looking at my compost, and the nutrients are there. I'm probably getting plenty. But I don't need any extra supplemental fertilizers or nutrients. And back to those nutrients and what they do. If you do need fertilizers, here's some different ones. Those livestock manures. Okay. The cover crops, your grade manures, compost, Mercer, then you can get commercial organic fertilizers. I heard it was nice enough to share this. This was a little catalog that Maria Stein Grain has, and I know other places would have that where you can get organic materials for plant, fertilizers if you wanted to buy those organic fertilizers. And simply working through them. I'm sure Helena has those, and Mercer Mark has some of those things too. And then there's the synthetic ones that you can buy also. Fertilizer. With any one of those, the level of nutrients and the availability of those nutrients is going to vary. Not all things are made the same. I'll go back to the compost. Okay, that all has to break down before those nutrients are available. As compared to if we buy Miracle-Gro, you mix that in with the water, it dissolves just like that. You put that on there, it's ready to go. There's no breaking down, nothing has to happen. So if you need it to plant right away, then that's a possible source. Again, depending on where you're getting it, what you're going to do. But it still is important that you feed your plants. You gotta feed them. All right, we'll keep moving here because time's moving along. Variety selection, that's another thing to keep in mind when you're looking at EcoFriendly. You're trying to do, there's whether you're buying those at seed, through a catalog, and the types that you have, or if you're buying potted plants, okay. Look at those, there's all kinds, some of those have been developed where they'd be more disease resistant. Okay. Last month we had in here with the heritage or heirloom plants, and a lot of those, they don't have that resistance built into them. Some of the plants have had those diseases resistance built into them and bred into them over time. Okay? And so therefore, when you're selecting, keep that in mind, know what you're doing, what you got, and with planting of those. The other thing, eco-friendly thing, if you're buying container plants, okay, if you can find them and buy them in those peat pots, they call them, okay, that's a more eco-friendly thing because you can just plant that in there, that peat pot naturally dissolves, roots grow right through it, okay, it's like organic matter formed into a shape. As compared to a plastic pot that you take it out of, and then what do you do with a plastic pot?
Recycle.
A lot of them go into the trash and end up in the landfill.
Myers recycles,
Do they?
yeah, back in Lima.
That's great, So if you can, do that.
Yeah.
But again, that's kind of a thing to keep in mind.
But all those pots are not alike. We had that discussion at Garden Club. Some of them they don't decompose. Some decompose real quick, but other ones don't. I think there's.
Depends on what they're made of, yeah.
Yeah.
What they used in that, you know.
Some people told me they take these out of those because they don't decompose well.
I looked at you yesterday. About that. But all this, it's bigger than the ground, did you go?
They're very, they probably will, but they very long time.
I had some decompose real quick.
And then others that go real fast, yeah. Okay, so again, variety selection. If you're starting seeds, compared to transplanting, depending on what you do, if there's advantages and disadvantages, but make sure that you look at, if you're starting those seeds, timing it correctly, using the right soil mix, then you need lighting, the right temperature, fertilizing, watering, all of those things. Adds to that time that you're doing it, if you enjoy doing that. That's one of the things in starting. If you start seeds, you have to make sure that you do with a process of hardening off for that plant before you put it into the transplanted into the garden. I recommend that even if you're buying transplants that come out of the greenhouse. And hardening off, what it is gradually acclimating them to outside temperature and conditions. If you take it right out of the greenhouse, put it in the garden, and all of a sudden it's got all the wind, and more water, and maybe colder temperatures back and forth, that puts a real stress on that plant. So you can gradually acclimate to that. You can use a cold frame. And if you're transplanting, again, make sure you look at the soil temperature, conditions, all of those things. Soil temperature, very easy. You look at the soil thermometer such as this. I always say, a lot of times the soil temperature is more important than that date on a calendar to get it planted. So, little thermometer like this, you can just put it in there at the depth that you're going to plant your seeds, or you're going to plant it where the roots are going to be at. See where it's at. Does that match up to what that plant should be at?
What temperature should most plants be at, or does it vary greatly?
It varies depending on if it's a cool season compared to a warm season time. You know, it's going to be a lot of, if you're germinating the seeds compared to transplanting plants, there's a difference. Most of them, as a general thing, most of them like 55 or higher. And that's soil temperature, not air temperature. And then, so like this spring, that soil temperature there in March was up there, but then by April we started having colder temperatures again, and cooler at night, and then boy, they were fluctuating back and forth, and I had some nice warm days, 60, 65, and think, oh, it's really nice, I can plant these things, but then at night it went down there in the 40s, and that soil temperature, it's going to jump back and forth. So here's pictures of cold frames and ways that you could possibly gradually acclimate those little boxes or whatever. Again, looking at what vegetables, we talked about these, the cool season. Is it a root crop versus an above ground type crop? What preparations do we need to have for soil requirements, pest considerations, all of those things. Warm season, space requirement, disease conditions, companion planting, pollination, all those things you need to take into consideration when you're selecting those plants and putting those out. Another thing that a lot of people, if you've got perennial plant, how does that affect your planting? Once you put that rhubarb out there, that's going to be there a long time. Or if you plant some asparagus, working with that. Again, planting, we're doing seeds, I'm just going to bust through these rows or hills, making sure space requirements. think about that adult plant and how much space it's going to need before you plant that. Here's again a picture showing use of space and some of the things that we can do. Going to vertical helps to make better use of that space that you're having within there and where you have them. Raised beds, we show this picture of those. That again helps warm the soil faster, drains better, so it might help out. Care and maintenance, weeding. The best thing here again, weeds, you can control those when they're small. Our weed specialist at the university always said, give the weeds a finger. And if they're bigger than your finger, you're gonna have problems controlling. Okay. And so don't let them get bigger than your finger. But that's part of weeding. There's different ways of doing that: cultivation, hand pulling, mulching, herbicides, depending on what you want to use. There's many different types of organic type herbicides that could be used rather than the chemical ones. And you go through all kinds of time. The thinning out and look at diseases, we'll see why that's necessary. Hilling, such as for potatoes, watering, better to water deep once a week than a little every day. Better to water in the morning rather than, or early afternoon, rather than late afternoon or evening. Here shows again thinning and being able to give that plant room and space. Doesn't have room to be able to grow. I know the carrots, I've tried growing those, and they're a challenge because, you gotta go through and thin them. If you don't, you're gonna have all kind of weird ones that grow together and everything else, and little spindly ones because they didn't have room to grow. Onions is another one that grows from seed. Real challenge, but being able to do that. Pelting potatoes and piling that up around those. I just got to mention this one, but that was one of the things I did back in high school. One of my projects that I did with the FFA was with potatoes, growing some, and they had some old tires. And so I planted it into one tire, and then as once it got big enough, put another tire on, put some more soil in. I got up to 5 tires, and I had potatoes all the way down through. I thought that was pretty neat. In a garden, you wouldn't be able to hill that, not that high. Again, different things in looking at being able to increase the space with what you have, being able to do. It was a real challenge keeping them out. Okay, part of what you have there. Weeding, different ways again that can be done. There's a good one with mulch, plastic mulch, putting them across. Okay. Or a weed barrier might be cost effective. Watering, again, better to water deep once a week than trying to do a little bit every day. Here's an example of just using a plastic jug with a couple little pinholes inside of it, or at the bottom. And then you just fill it and let it slowly weep out next to the plant. Put those with the tape, in that way. Soaker hoses, slowly weep out. Is another good way to do watering, that you get a water within that. The morning or early afternoon is your best time, so that moisture doesn't sit there. The plant can use when that moisture is there. This is a common mistake that I see a lot of people do. They want to put that water on that plant. And don't do that. Because all you're doing is inviting disease when you do that. You want to get that water to the roots. The water does no good up here on the lakes. Just no good. It doesn't go into the plant. It's got to get to the roots, get into that plant. It might cool it because it's a super hot day, but that's only going to last for a little bit. Yeah. So you want to do that. When it comes to disease, understanding the disease triangle, and when it comes to disease, you got to have 3 things. And first of all, you got to have the disease pathogen. And that's usually out there somewhere. Those spores are out there. Okay? And then you gotta have a host for that pathogen to live on. And that could be the plant. Okay, if it's a susceptible plant. Okay? Now, those two can be out there, but nothing happens until the environment's just right. And that's where if we've got most disease pathogens need moisture and heat. Okay? And if you get those, at that point, when those three all come together, the disease is going to grow. Now, which of these can you control? A little bit at least. Okay? That pathogen and that disease pathogen, maybe through a little bit of tillage or removal of disease things and getting it away so that it's not there, that's tough because those little spores, they can blow in the wind real easy too. And travel. And so that's a challenge. A host plant, that comes back to that selection. If we select plants that maybe have the resistance within them, then maybe that pathogen can't hit. Okay? The environment. Well, the hot, humid weather, it's hard to control that. Unless maybe you put some shade cloth over your garden or something like that to help keep it cool. But again, we need moisture. And so therefore, that comes back to that water. If you're adding that water to the top of that plant, and doing that maybe later in the evening when you get home from work, right, that moisture's got a longer chance of staying there and not evaporating. And so therefore, you're going to, maybe through the whole night, that it might stay wet. And then you have the chance for that disease to grow. Whereas if you do that in the early morning or early afternoon, now you've got a chance that it's going to dry out quicker. You keep your plants spread apart so that the air can blow through them, they'll dry out. You pack them together, and now the air can't get that center of that plant dry. And it holds that moisture in, and now we've got the chance of the disease growing. So some simple steps in understanding, okay, what can I do to help control the environment, be able to make the bed work? That's disease management working with it. A little bit clearer? All right. Insect pests, make sure that you know what you're dealing with. When it comes to management, know what are some of the common pest problems with that plant. So if it's your tomatoes, common one with tomato is which one? Or that hornworm, that big green thing. Okay? But know what you're dealing with and know what it looks like. So therefore then I can be looking for it if it's an issue. Okay? And then know its life cycle. When is it a problem and when is it not? Okay? Most of the time it's in the larval stage. When it's a little worm, that thing that just hatched from an egg, formed into that larva, and it just came out and it's hungry. And so it's going to eat everything to it. It's in the pupa stage, well, it's already been done, did its harm. And we're going to form, or if it's in the adult stage, some of the adult stages don't do any damage. Other than lay new eggs. And so understanding where they're at, and what life cycle and what has, know what insects. Do we know what this is? That's a ladybug larva. So that's actually a ladybug beetle in the larva stage. A lot of people look at that and think, oh man, I gotta get rid of that thing. I think most of us know ladybugs are good things to have around.
That's like we don't see many.
Don't see many. Right?
Yeah.
Well, I've seen these, the spiders, garden spiders.
Yes.
And they're freaky looking. They are. Okay? But again, a lot of those garden spiders are eating other insects.
Oh, so they're good to keep.
So if you want to keep them around, yeah, it depends on whether you want to work around them or
I
not.
hate spiders.
Okay. But again, knowing what you have, if there are things, you can hand pick them out, that hornworm. It's a possibility. You could put barriers up, such as screens, to keep them out. If you wanted netting, there are different biological methods, choosing cultural ones that are insect resistant. Again, there's a possibility, or there's insecticides. Again, there's things such as insecticidal soaps or neem oil that work very good. They're an organic thing. It's just like a soap or an oil, puts a coating on. And a lot of times if you put that on, it's like putting it over the egg, and it prevents the egg from hatching. If you know that, and if it's timed right. Okay. So again, understanding the life cycle and what's there and what are some of the possible ones. So they're products rather than just the chemical pesticides that a lot of people will reach for. Last one, looking at end of season. Very important that you remove your dead material. You leave it there, come September or August, you're like, I'm tired of this. And so you just walk away from it. You're inviting problems for the next season. Okay, because all of these dead plant material is placed for insects and diseases to live and harbor over for the winter. So if we can remove those, get them into it, chop them up, run them through the lawnmower, chop them up, and then put them in the compost, it's a good way to help out there. If it is diseased material, you want to destroy that, get that out. Don't put it in the compost because it won't survive unless you can get that compost hot enough to be able to kill it. And if you've got a bare garden, you could go in now. That would be the time to add that compost material, those amendments that may be needed. So that way it has through the rest of the fall and into the winter or early spring to do that chemical reaction that might be needed in there, things for. Then one that a lot of people don't realize, but it's your garden hose. And pay special attention to those hand trimmers or shears if you're using those. Is to sanitize. Just a little spray bottle with diluted hydrogen peroxide, chlorine, and that will help kill and clean any harmful diseases or organisms that might be on it. And that could harbor, a lot of people don't think of that. But clean them up before you put them away. And then the other possibility is plant cover crop on the end of the season. Again, the goal of a gardener, as we mentioned here, is to build that sort of organic matter. The better you can build that, okay? The better your garden, more productive your garden will be. Cover crops is one of those. Here's some pictures. Rye is a common one. Rye and oat cover crop was planted September. Here's what it looked like in mid-October. Compared to late August there, but had very good growth and planted in that garden. And here's what that same crop looked in about the middle of January. You notice there's a lot of dead stuff. What's the dead? Actually, advantage of planting an oat cover crop. Oats will not survive the freeze. It'll grow really good in the fall. And then once you got a frost, it kills off. But look at all that dead material that you've got there that can add organic matter to that. And then you still have some green from the rye. Again, I said I have a brother-in-law that loves to till. I talked him into with his garden. He had a pretty good sized garden, 20 by 40, I would say, in his backyard, pretty good size. I talked him into planting, and he said, why don't you put a cover crop on it? So he tried it, and it had a lot of rye. It had a mix of both things, rye. And he's like, what am I going to do with that in the spring? Okay? I said, well, just take your lawnmower, and when you're ready, go across that. You just mow it up, raise it up, chop it up, best you can, and then bring it down, really just chop it all up and spread it across there. And then if you want to do your tilling, now go in and till. And just mix it in. And what you've done is you've taken, you look at that, all these little green stems have those nutrients in. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, all those micronutrients. And what have you done? You've taken, mixed those in and added that fertilizer. That's your green manures. And you just recycle those back into that soil. one way to be able to improve your soil. Okay, and doing a cover crop. Again, different pictures of some growing in here and the time of the year. This is one, no tilling in between, you know, you can let your cover crop grow and just break up the spot where you're gonna plant your plants so the other keep growing. Now you got paths to work through and you don't have to work in the mud. That's a possibility. Now, you gotta understand, there may be some complications. But again, what, you know, or if it's like that oat, let it sit there, don't till it in, just let it on top. What cover it creates and protects that soil, and just put it where you're going to plant your other things. And that was another one I talked to my brother-in-law into doing then, because he said the one year he did it after the garden was all done, and now we got into growth. He said, okay, next time, take it and in August, even though your tomatoes are still growing, you've got a whole lot of tomatoes and peppers. I said, go down there in between, just plant it all in between. Because your plants, really, those tomatoes don't need any more nutrients. They're just going to ripen. And let those grow in between you. Get them started. And now you've got that month of August and October that can grow, but you can still go in and ripen, you know, get your tomatoes and have that cover crop. And boy, did it work great for me. So, I think possibilities in working with them. Here, looking at sweet corn and growing out, you just did the middle tilled in between, left the others growing in there. Again, ways to do that. And again, this is what you work for. I'm trying to put those in there.
Is there a place to buy just a small amount? Like I have a very small garden and I was thought about cover crop, but can I just go buy enough or do you have to, I'm always thinking I need to buy a lot, I don't need a lot.
You don't need a lot, with what you have. And you're ready for it. I say that for everybody else. We're ready for it. You will contact me. And let me know. I'll get you some. That was great. Between extension and soil and water down here, just on the other side of the building. They got a grant where we got some cover crop seed for gardens. And, you know, if you're in the county, if you bring me the size of your garden, we'll measure out what you need and you can go plant. Huh?
Like a cup.
Like a cup? We've got a scale there, we can measure down to the ounce. Again, and the price is right. Again, a little summary, to be realistic in what you're going to do, plan things out. Keep a journal, kind of, so you know what's happening, what you did, what you learned. That there is a learning curve with all of this. I'm sure everybody knows exactly what we went through here and understands that all. But there's a lot to keep in mind. Different varieties, methods. You know, there's lots of things that you can experiment with and try and see what works for you. You know, because what works for one person may not work for another. Most likely it won't work for another. You know, you can try it, okay, but where's your level at and being able to make it work? And then the key thing is that organic matter. You can stress that when it comes to the soil and building that. And then also remember, sometimes the weeds and pests, the insects, they might win, you know, and what you're doing. But it's a plan, you can try and get around it. And at the same time, enjoy what you're doing. If it becomes too much work and you're not having fun, then quit. You know, find another hobby or something else to do. With that, questions?